Welcome, Emily, and thank you so much for presenting today.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for having me, Greg. And it's really nice to see all of you. I just asked Greg, I'm like, I'm going to be able to see folks, right? This isn't going to be a webinar. I'd so much prefer to see faces, and hope everybody's doing well. I'm imagining that you're seeing more students back in class, and that it's another transition. It's another sort of shift. I'm watching my own kids who I have twins in 8th grade and a husband who teaches high school English go through it. And it's another, another change. So I'm thinking of all of you, and always have, deep respect for the work you're doing. And I really want to, thank Greg. The quick backstory is that I was director of education at the Jacob Burns Film Center for many, many years. And it was in that capacity that I got to know Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES. They were a wonderful partner. And as I began a new chapter at the Kunhardt Film Foundation and found myself more squarely in the world of social studies and civics and somewhat new content, he's just been a great partner. And sort of I'm learning some of this as I go as well. But I'm fortunate to be working with some really, really wonderful sort of raw content and material that I'm excited to let you know about. So I am gonna, what I've prepared for our bit of time together are some slides and a clip from one of our films, and a quick peek at our website, an opportunity at the end to ask questions, but this is very informal. So at any point, please raise your emoji hand, your real hand. I hope to be a conversation, and in no way am I sort of talking at you. As I've already shared, I really sort of have deference to the content specialty that all of you have. So here we go with my screen. And Greg, I'm going to ask you to, I'm currently disabled on that feature. So just to.
There you go. Now you should be enabled.
Thank you. I'm in. I appreciate it. All right. So here we are. It is April 27th. Where is the time going? So I just wanted to share a little bit of background on KFF. It'll be very brief. These are two of the projects that I'm going to mention today. The Kunhardts are a family, actually, of filmmakers, and are also based in Westchester. We have an office in Pleasantville. And I love this image because it really sort of represents to me the very just innate curiosity that the people I've worked with have grown up with. This is them in their attic in Chappaqua, poring over the archives that their family has inherited over many generations of President Lincoln, and a relative that was a photographer in the Union Army. And these archives are now on exhibit at Yale. But it represents to me how this family has, over generations, just embraced a love of history, a curiosity about leadership, an interest in what constitutes moral leadership. And they've been storytellers in whatever medium of that time sort of demanded or allowed for. So they've had, their grandfather was a managing editor at Life magazine. They now work in the realm of documentary filmmaking, and they direct and produce films through HBO. And those projects that I mentioned before are all streaming on HBO. But if you don't have a subscription, I'm going to share a link with you at the end. It's very easy for me to share Vimeo links and give you access to these films if they're of interest. Just to say again, I mean, they believe in a very, very deep sort of allegiance to fact and to history. We have an unbelievable archival producer I feel like I can, bring these materials to classrooms because they are created with such integrity and such thoughtfulness about accuracy and the use of primary sources, the use of eyewitness testimony. It doesn't mean that their films don't have a point of view. It doesn't mean that they don't have their own perspective or bias at times, but it does mean that the materials that are composing, the actual content of a feature-length film are presented with just deep accuracy. And I think, understandably, that's an incredibly important thing that we as educators have to consider at this particular moment. And they're interested in history, but they're really interested in the people that are shaping history. And so what I think is such a wonderful access point for their films is, and this is in true deference to the work of somebody like Ken Burns, a sweeping historical chronology is an incredibly important and useful learning tool. I think emotionally and sort of narratively, the ability to focus on a particular person and on a particular person's story and impact provides potentially more places of connection for young people and for all of us, for any of us. We're all we're all audience all the time. And so in the King in the Wilderness film, it's really a really human look at Dr. King as a person, as a father, as a husband, in addition to all of his public roles. And another film that we did on the attorney Brian Stevenson is as much about his work in the legal field as about his personal coming of age and experiences. So these are what we're sort of, seeking. These are the values we're trying to imbue into the materials that we create. I wanted to share today, and I'm not going to dwell on this slide. I know that this will be shared, so you guys can always come back to this, but given my background in film, I think it's always important just to underscore how to use film, documentary film, narrative, shorts, anything in a teaching context takes intention. So you can always come back to this. And I wanted to focus on the soul of America today in our short time together. We saw that poster earlier, and the soul of America, I'll leave the sort of engagement goals up on screen while I just give you a very brief background. It premiered on HBO in October rather of 2020. And it's based and inspired by the book, The Soul of America by historian John Meacham. And I don't know if any of you have ever come across John Meacham on Morning Joe. He's a frequent contributor on MSNBC. He also has actually went on to be a speechwriter during the Biden campaign. And I imagine many of us heard the language of the soul of the country, the soul of America during that time. And it was Meacham's thinking and the film's thesis and Biden's use of that term is really not to, it's really a nonpartisan framing. I've got company. Hold on. Yeah, somebody wants to chime in. Sorry. I'm hoping somebody's gonna come to my aid here. Of course, my whole family's home, right? So as a really nonpartisan, objective view of this country's history and the idea that we aren't all one thing, we aren't all good or bad. We are this ever sort of ebbing flow of impulses. And he's interested in a conversation not about sort of hope and hate, but rather hope and fear. What are the insecurities as Americans that we can have that lead to the negative impulses. So I rather than talk about that idea, I'm going to show you a clip from the film. So before I do, so the film it's about 75 minutes. It lays out a thesis about these perennial forces, which we'll look at in a minute. And then there's 4 case studies. And I think the 4 case studies are of really deep relevance to the teaching that's happening in social studies classrooms. The first is on the suffrage movement, and actually looking at the women's suffrage movement, not just from the point of view of what it gained, but also the populations that it left behind, what that movement, implications of that movement for women of color, for example. The second case study is FDR and Japanese American incarceration. The third case study is on McCarthyism. And the fourth case study is the civil rights movement, and particularly the role of the president and of LBJ in signing in historic legislation. So what's really useful is that these case studies are a way to apply this sort of historical thinking of John Meacham. And I think it's a really, even for middle school, a very accessible entry point into even what sort of historical thinking is, what a framework is, and how to think about the past in the context of the contemporary moment. So let's take a look at, it's just about a 2.5 minute clip, but it'll give you a sense of the way the film is constructed, where it's going to bring in John Meacham's voice, and it's going to share his reflections through a contemporary moment on where we've been. In this case, it's going to be the neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville, which was the impetus for the writing of his book. And so in some ways, the impetus for the film. And I think it's worth, I think it's important when we share media and images and to model here that there are a couple of upsetting images of a lynching. And I just want everyone to be prepared for that. So let's take a look.
Nativism, xenophobia, racism, sexism, isolationism are perennial American forces. They ebb and they flow. The story of race and fear and anxiety and violence is inextricably intertwined with the story of the country. It's not that the soul of a country has been captured by a particular group at a particular time. The soul of the country is, in fact, this essence, which is not all good or all bad. You have your better angels fighting against your worst impulses. And that has a religious component, certainly. It's also, though, a matter of historical observation. Our history is shaped by the extent to which those better angels or those worst instincts win out in a given period of time. It was true in the 1760s. It was true in the 1860s. It was true in the 1960s. And it's true today.
White nationalist blogger had called upon his followers to meet here in Charlottesville to protest the city's efforts to try to take down the statue of Robert E. Lee from a city park.
When the Charlottesville riots happened, the neo-Nazi rally and then the death of Heather Heyer, the editor of Time magazine at the time called and said, "Do you have anything to say historically about the history of hate in American politics?" So I started with Reconstruction and moved forward. And it became a book about the soul of the country. The fact that in the 21st century, people calling themselves Klansmen are in Charlottesville, Virginia, the home of Robert E. Lee, basically fighting for an antebellum vision of the world is a remarkable thing. But it's not all that remarkable if you know American history. And if you know that 5 minutes after Lee's surrender, the reaction sets in. White supremacy replaced slavery as the consuming concern of white Southerners. Segregation replaced human enslavement. And so when people say the Civil War never really ended, that's pretty much what they mean.
Okay, so I'd like to sort of, I guess I'm feeling like I'd like to pause there. And I didn't set up, the possibility that we might talk about that clip, but maybe I'll pause. That's all I'll do. If anybody wants to sort of comment or ask a question, I'm always interested in, how these materials feel, in your point of view, and the ways, the kind of conversations you're having, really with the recognition that these are really difficult conversations. And I think that, wading into current events has its own responsibility and its own difficulty. So again, if anyone wants to sort of comment, I'll be ready for you. We can also, move on. I wanted to show you, I'm going to transition out of the slides and into our website. So we're going to be on kunhardtfilmfoundation.org. And I'm going to take us into where on the website the materials live and a little bit of how to navigate what's here. Everything I'm showing you, I haven't had to log in. It's everything's there. It's quite accessible. There's no need to have a kind of membership or registration or anything. It's all for free. And again, this would be the landing page. If you went to kunhardtfilmfoundation.org, there's that beautiful image. I think that image itself would be a really wonderful sort of prompt in a classroom to get some conversation going. Just that alone is telling quite a story. If I go into Educator Resources, there's 4 projects here that are here for you, 5 rather, really, here for you to use. We didn't mention yet, this is a film about John McCain. There's the King in the Wilderness Project. True Justice is about Brian Stevenson. And then here we are in The Soul of America. I'm going to go right to left. In the interview archive, one of the really special features of the Kunhardt Film Foundation's work, and this is true for all of their projects, is that we share the full-length interviews that were done in the creation of the film. And so in this case, one of the interviews that I'd like to highlight is George Takei. He gives an incredibly moving interview about his own family's experience of Japanese incarceration during World War II. He's somebody that students are still probably familiar with. He also has an incredible graphic novel called They Called Us Enemy. That's a really wonderful teaching tool. He, of course, was a star on Star Trek, and just tells a really moving story. And there's also, conversations here with historians. And I'll also mention Joanne Bland and Janice Wesley Kelsey, who were both marchers in the Children's March in Birmingham during the Civil Rights Movement. So again, the Children's Crusade is another great entry point for middle school, even upper elementary school. So all these interviews are here. Of course, pieces of George Takei's story end up in the film and are used quite powerfully in the film. And I'll go back here. I'm going to go back to that page. The screening guide is a material that's intended to use if you've you know, your class or your faith community has seen the the film in its entirety and are going to have a discussion, and there's suggested discussion questions, some additional resources. But we're going to go into the lesson plans. This is where these are the sort of thesis of the film, and then the case studies broken out. And I want to stick with this, the FDR case study for now. We've been finding the film as having, particular relevance and strength in this climate of anti-Asian American and Pacific Islander targeted violence. And this case study of the film, the clip of which is located right down here, does a really wonderful job. Here it is. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll over. It's clip 5, Soul of America in Pearl Harbor. It's an 8-minute clip, and it does a really good job of setting up that sort of xenophobic, undercurrent that led to, this incredible atrocity against civil rights in this country. Certainly it predated that, but this idea of, immigrants taking jobs and fear of the unknown and the otherness, and it's a really wonderful, I think, helpful tool for this moment. We don't have time to watch it today, but I wanted you to know where it is. And here's an excerpt of George Takei's interview. Overall, you can use the lesson as it is on the website here. You can also download it as a PDF, and it's really a really nicely designed piece, if that's sort of how your brain works better, to have something sort of you can print out and make notes on and scribble and, make your own. That's usually my sort of mode of operation. That's, that may be where you want to go. So it's just it's an easy download just to show you. And again, suggested questions, the objectives, the materials that you'll need. And then the last thing I want to show you, and then I'm gonna, I hope we can have just a little bit of exchange here. The photo archive is another tool here. And in this case, when we go into the Soul of America, these are usually Library of Congress images, because we are trying to use things that are already in the public domain. Not sure why it doesn't want to load here. Come on. An interesting thing that I learned in the process of working on this film is that Dorothea Lange actually created and shot some of the most sort of iconic images of the Japanese American incarceration. And while she's better known, of course, for her work with the Great Depression, I'll show you, this is a Dorothea Lange photo. And there's a whole sort of story behind her work. Come on. I'm sorry, things are loading a little slowly today. Where are you? One more try.
While it's loading, Emily, I'll just kind of hop in. I think that one thing you got it?
Nope.
Okay. So I just want to, I think that our teachers oftentimes struggle with visual images and, struggle with stimuli and finding really high quality resources. So at the very least, I would make sure that you bring this resource back and just have teachers look at the images, because as Emily mentioned before, film is terrific and film is powerful, but so are still images also. And so you have this terrific repository of these really high quality images. You have, what would be considered to be documents that could be, have information pulled out from. And as we think about supporting, right, even though SSELA is K through 8, we really want to support the practices. We want to move students towards success on the high school regions. There is so much civics in here, and thinking about the civics literacy essay in 11th grade, thinking about the fact that every single question on Regents exams now is somehow tied to a stimuli. here you have a great kind of treasure trove of resources for teachers to use beginning in 6th grade and running kind of all the way through.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. And while that one doesn't want to sort of enlarge for me, I mean, I think to have a conversation about this one in particular, here's a young boy. These are students in a school in which they've been detained doing the Pledge of Allegiance with the American flag. I mean, there's so much to talk about here, and sort of a just through this one image, as Greg mentioned. I'm quickly going to hop back to this slide, just so that you do have a link. It's very there's probably a better way. Greg, maybe you can share this after the fact. And my contact information is fine too, but these are links. If there's a way to share them, this is the easiest way to just request the full film in case you don't have HBO. I'll just send a Vimeo link and a password.
So what I'll do, Emily, is on the website, I'll actually put all of the applicable links, and then people can contact you. I call it the care package. Anything you want me to incorporate or include from this actual presentation, that can also be hosted and posted on the website as well. So whatever you want to send with me and share with me, all the educators will have access to it.
Oops, I was on mute there. Thank you so much. That's perfect. And my very last slide is just to share with you guys some exciting news that we just received, that the Kunhardt's film, they have a new film coming out shortly about Gordon Parks, the photographer, and it's going to have its premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival in June. So I'm really excited to bring that to you. And talk about the power of images. This is Ella Watson. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this photograph. So that could be a whole other hour conversation. But I will stop it there in terms of what I'd prepared. I'm happy to answer any questions or hear from all of you on what you're thinking about.
I wanted to add, I think the resources are amazing. And like Greg said, as you were scrolling through those images, I was like, just can't wait to pass them along to the teachers, because, you Google images and it's always the same ones that tend to come up. And as Greg said, it's stimulus based. And so the more images we get and different types of those types of resources we can present to our students, the better it's going to be. I also noticed in the beginning you kind of skipped over it. It said like watch without sound, right? And I once went to this museum called the Museum of Moving Image, I think.
Sure. Yes.
And they made us watch a documentary without sound. They made us watch the documentary with our eyes closed and just the sound.
Just sound, yeah.
First, and then and it was just that was so long ago, but it stuck into my mind, and I actually did that with my own students. So I think like a practice like that is so amazing, because we're so used to kind of just taking it all. It's so much. So a practice like that, where we're kind of shutting off one of those things just to kind of watch the images or just hear the sound, I think is something really different that I think we could share with students.
Great. Yeah. And I did kind of rush through that slide, but I think that that breaking down media into those components of image and sound, it's really important. It sharpens it, right? Yeah, that's great. And that says so much that experience made that kind of impression on you. Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
I was just going to share. Hi, my name's Amanda. I'm the Director of Social Studies in Newburgh. We have a Facing History in Ourselves course, Crimes of Humanity. And
yeah,
the course is an elective. So, within the framework and the vision for FHAO, the teacher tends to stay in there and covering a whole range of topics, not just in the United States.
Yes.
Holocaust, Armenian genocide, Rwandan genocide, but you think about crimes of humanity and, you know, like any other types of human behavior, there's that spectrum from really, you know, what we think, our fears, our impulses, to taking action. So, you know, is it extreme and cruel and intentional, like a genocide, or is it an internment, which is also a crime against humanity? And so this is definitely a resource I'm going to pass on to the folks who have been trained with FHAO and doing that course. So thank you.
Great, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I know Facing History quite well, and we collaborated on a program with them with this film because of all the things you just identified. There's a real similarity with their framework and this film. Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, we don't have to look too far. We don't have to look internationally to have conversations about, yeah, crimes against humanity. Thank you.
Oh, you know what? I just want to say this because this is a trigger warning comes with this. Have you seen 22 July?
No.
It's a documentary on Netflix. It is violent. It is but it is it's coverage of the 2011 white extremist attack in Oslo, in Norway.
I wrote it down.
It was a total of 77 people died. Most of them were children.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah. So
the camp.
Yeah. And originally it was you just, if it's definitely not a Netflix and chill film, you know, like it's intense.
Thank you.
Yeah, we were contemplating with a, you know, permission slip in regard to violence, bringing that into the course as well, because we like to look at it from like, yeah, we're here. The United States doesn't hold a monopoly on, you know, cruelty and crimes of humanity. We're humanity globally, you know, to open up a conversation about right-wing, white extremist terror.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate the recommendation.
I just want to take the opportunity again to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon, and again to thank Emily for just being an outstanding partner. You know, we've said this many times. We said this last month with Generation Citizen. It's very hard during the pandemic to look at, you know, bright spots, and you know, in the midst of all this turmoil, one of the things has been these solidifying of partnerships with these terrific organizations. And Emily is, again, a terrific resource. She is super reactive and proactive in communication. And so I really would encourage you, when we do post the video on the website and then the links and Emily's contact information, just to reach out to her if you do have questions, because again, you know, she does bring that really critical eye. And as many of you have said, there's just the power in imagery, right? There's the power in telling people's stories. And there's also humanizing quality, because so often our students look at these historical figures and they feel, you know, like they're learning about people that are completely and totally disconnected and are otherworldly, when in fact they're oftentimes motivated, as John Meacham said, right? We all have those good or not so good impulses, and that's what kind of drives the narrative and drives our story. So thank you again for joining us this afternoon, and please look in the coming days for those resources to be posted on the website. And we wish you all health and wellness. And as always, if we can be of any assistance to you, always feel free to reach out to us here at SSELA. Have a wonderful afternoon.